Damon Martin MMA fighting here with the CEO of Triller, the man who will be promoting the upcoming fight between Vitor Belfort and Oscar De La Hoya, not to mention the newly announced fight between a pair of UFC legends, Anderson Silva and Tito Ortiz. Welcome in today, Ryan Kavanaugh. Ryan, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Damon.
Absolutely. So, Ryan, obviously huge news this week, massive card coming up on September 11th, and you managed to make it even bigger. We were already excited for Vitor versus Oscar De La Hoya. We saw the press conference just recently, and now a coup. You signed a boxing match between a pair of UFC legends. Let me start there. How did this happen? How did this all come about?
Sure. Well, I mean, it's a culmination of lots of people's hard work. I need to correct something too. I'm not the CEO of Triller. I'm one of the co-founders, co-owners, but not the CEO. So back to the question. Sorry. We've obviously been trying to marry combat sports in general, as well as music and culture, into kind of this whole boxing phenomenon. And we started, I think, with Tyson by trying to bring a legend who is a boxing purist, but introducing it to a different world by merging with music and obviously something that felt a little more like a movie. Obviously putting Jake on that undercard was strategic to then be able to build something around Jake and bring a younger audience into what was a shrinking business. Here, as we expand, the concept has always been to start bringing the MMA into boxing, because they really are two different audiences, as you know. Some crossover, but not a lot. Like MMA purists and boxing purists are two different people. They really shouldn't be if it's done right. They're both combat sports. They're both, have very similar, call it physical capabilities. And so, we've been wanting to converge them. And we've started to in the past by putting a boxer against MMA. Here, we really sought out who are two legends that people want to see fight each other, who are two legends of MMA that in and of themselves are already a big draw, but then together bring a fight that the world wants to see. And that's kind of how we built this.
It's such a unique concept. What I've enjoyed about Triller, through all the cards you guys have done, is that it really is something we haven't seen before. It's something unique. Now, obviously, we all know you're working with Teofimo Lopez, one of the best boxers on the planet right now, which is a huge deal as well. But you've also married that, as you mentioned, with bringing back Mike Tyson, which was a massive event, huge event. And then again, you talk about working with Jake Paul. Now with this card, you're bringing Oscar De La Hoya back, again, a legend of the sport, one of the greatest boxers of all time. Vitor Belfort, of course, one of the greatest mixed martial artists of all time. And then you bring in Anderson Silva and Tito Ortiz. Any mixed martial arts fan from any of the last 20 years knows who those guys are. So, I mean, it seems like you really are kind of marrying a lot of different things together and doing something that's really never been done before.
Well, and that's really, I think what our goal is, and it's nice to hear that it's working somewhat. We look at this as, at the end of the day, it's boxing. These are real bouts. These are not exhibition bouts. So it's pro boxing rules, but boxing, MMA, it's for entertainment. The point is, no matter which way you want to skin it, the reason people watch is because it's entertaining. The reason people pay is because it's entertaining. And as boxing is shrinking and losing its audience and became kind of a predominantly, male over 50 audience, the times weren't keeping up. Kids are used to watching everything on this, using a phone. Kids are used to their screens being the front row, and boxing wasn't keeping up with that. So our goal is to entertain, using boxing at the center and blending in the MMA world, the boxing world, the music world. We'll have big music acts. Snoop obviously will be the host as usual. We brought in Nigel Lithgow, who created American Idol, and So You Think You Can Dance, and produced them, to be our producer. I mean, this will be an epic show. I don't even call it a boxing match. I don't call it an MMA match. It's a show.
So let me confess something to you, Ryan, because when we first talked through email and eventually through text message, I was like, oh, here's the guy producing the Triller shows. This is, okay, I'm talking to the guy who's producing the Triller shows. It took me a little while to put two and two together that you're also one of the biggest producers in Hollywood history, and you were the same guy. Like, I was like, oh, that's the same Ryan Kavanaugh? Like, it's the same guy. you've brought in that element of the Hollywood production into the fight game. You mentioned obviously, marrying the fights with the music and with the production, with the film, with the way you film the shows, the way you shoot the shows. Do you feel like that's just an element that you brought into this that just no one has tried before? And that's a big deal because we are seeing something different. Like there's entertainment on top of entertainment in terms of the fights. Like I loved watching Mike Tyson and Roy Jones Jr. That was so much fun. But then you had so many other elements in there, and that's again something that's no one has ever really tried before in this industry.
Yeah, I think that was our goal again when we were looking at boxing, and one of the reasons why is boxing audience shrinking? Why is it a 50 and over sport? Well, it just hadn't evolved. If you looked, watch a fight from 30 years ago, watch a fight from yesterday, they look the same camera angles, same announcers, same kind of lingo, same moves, same lights, all that big up lighting, so on and so forth. It's just a very back before you had 4K TVs and 100-inch screens. Yeah, okay, that's fine because there's only so much you could do with a TV, and boxing was made for the person who paid $10,000 for the front row. But that's not the case anymore. Everybody has a front row now. Everybody has a 4K or an 8K TV or some form of super high def. And the kind of comparatives is, especially when you look at kids, is they've got so much entertainment and multimedia surrounding them. If you're not going to give them a show, they're not going to watch it. And so we realized no one was giving them the show they wanted. So we brought, as you said, movie production elements. We did the Tyson fight. We kind of, used what we did. We made this movie, The Fighter. So we used the same exact structure of lighting and cameras and, 40, 50 cameras, 50 lighting package, like things that just have never been done before in boxing. The Jake Paul fight, we had 65 cameras. We had lighting packages that were beyond anything you would have seen in any fight. And that's what we're going to continue to bring.
What's funny is like when the Tyson and Jones Jr. fight came up, I was excited because obviously you got a pair of legends, two guys very well known. And then you do Jake Paul and Ben Askren. Now, of course, being the MMA guy, I'm super familiar with Ben. I've known Ben since he got out of the Olympics. And of course, everyone knows Jake Paul from social media. But when you look at the buzz surrounding your events so far, and obviously the buzz surrounding this event on September 11th, obviously, listen, I like boxing. Obviously, I cover mixed martial arts for a living. But when you and I'm talking specifically about boxing now, though, is like when you see a big fight now, outside of let's say maybe Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder, which is within the last couple of years, the buzz surrounding a lot of big boxing fights, it's not there. There's just not that buzz, like that social media buzz, that online buzz of excitement. Like I feel like for a long time, like, people didn't even know who Vasyl Lomachenko was. Like you could not say that to somebody, and they even knew his name, and he was considered one of the best boxers on the planet. Do you feel like that's something you're able to take advantage of because you had the foresight to say, hey, let's bring in a guy like Jake Paul, who is, obviously not a super experienced boxer, but he has a massive audience, and take advantage of that. And just like with booking Oscar De La Hoya and Vitor Belfort, like that's not a traditional boxing matchup. That's not something a traditional boxing promoter would do. But look at the buzz that it's created since it was announced.
Yeah, I mean that's well, thank you, and yes, we are literally trying to shake it up. As I say, we're just shaking shit up. The concept is we want it every fight we do, we want to bring to a new level, and that doesn't necessarily mean better. Although we learn from each one, but it's an event, it's not a fight, and we want to bring something for everyone. So on this fight, you'll see we're about to announce 5 of the biggest acts surrounding Mexican Independence Day and it being kind of Latin Appreciation Month, and Oscar's fight back in LA for the first time in, since the beginning of his career. But yeah, putting Oscar and Vitor together, and even, the Jake Ben and Tyson, it was really looking at how do we broaden this audience and how do we give them, like, have the world be interested in boxing again. I mean, back when I grew up, if there was a fight, the whole family knew about the fight. I mean, even my mom didn't like fighting, but it would be like Tyson was fighting, you watched. It's just like one of those things. It's and so like the Super Bowl. You might not love football, but everybody watches the Super Bowl. It's one of those things that it's unfortunate that the sport hasn't kept up with the times, with the tech, with the people, with the youth. There's a lot of people fighting us on it, and they're boxing purists, and they get offended by what we do, which we always say, look, we're throwing real boxing. These are people that are very talented athletes. They're people who are at the top of their game or at the top of where they are in their game. But, they don't have to watch if they don't want, but still it's kind of like, hey, if it's not working, like you said, if people aren't following the biggest fights, then why is it not evolving? So we kind of feel like there was 3 or 4 players in the game before us, and they were kind of controlling the game, and there was a lot of room for change.
Absolutely. And listen, if you're not, forgive my language, you're not pissing off people, you're not doing the right thing, because that's how it works in this business. If people aren't mad at what you're doing or upset that you're doing something they're not doing, then you're not doing the right things, because that's how you kind of shake up things in an industry, is by making people watch. Obviously, you did that a lot during your production career. I mean, I've read articles, the way you changed a lot of the way Hollywood thought about movie making and producing movies, and doing the same thing in combat sports. Listen, when you got Dana White, going crazy, in a 10-minute tirade about you at a post-fight press conference, you're doing something right.
Yeah, that was a good one. I loved hearing. I'm not going to talk about them, but then he spent like half the press conference going on a tirade about us. Thank you, Dana. We appreciate it very much. It's look, I do think we're trying to do something different. We're trying to do something that broadens it, and I get that it scares people in the business. I don't think it should, because we kind of are friendly to everyone. Like, we want to work with everyone. We want to help elevate boxers, and it should be seen as a positive. I mean, like you said, if Lomachenko has 300,000 potential pay-per-view buyers, if we put him on our card and we put him on a Fight Club fight and we hand him back, he's going to have 600,000 or 700,000 buyers, and that should be seen as a positive for the promoter and for the managers and for the fighters. And some people get it and call us every day and work with us, and others do everything they can to sabotage it. But, par for the course, right? Like you said, if it was easy, everybody would do it.
Yeah. Well, just like, obviously you saw, like, we obviously saw what Anderson Silva did recently in this fight with Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. That was such an impressive performance. 46 years old. And I said it as a guy who's covered Anderson's career for the last 20 years. He looked happier than he's ever looked in that fight. And then you look at Tito, obviously, Tito's a legend of the sport. Obviously, we know he's fought the best. Like, when that matchup came together, I was like, you know what, this makes sense. And Anderson, obviously, you had to see what he did in his boxing match. I'm sure that gave you confidence booking him. But I mean, that's something you got to take advantage of, right? Like, there was so much buzz around Anderson Silva. Why wouldn't you book a fight like that?
Yeah. So for us, when, we obviously with what Anderson just did, he just did what everybody said was impossible. Everybody was said, oh, well, everybody knows that an MMA guy can't beat a boxer. Right. And it was just like a given. And then it happened. And it's like, well, actually, an MMA guy did just beat a boxer, and a good one. So that really gave us, for us, made Anderson very, appealing. And then finding the right opponent for Anderson, we just we really did a whole process of like, who does the MMA world want to see, Anderson fight? And Tito has been so polarizing that I think a lot of people are going to be on both sides, right? This becomes not just a battle of the UFC, a battle of, world-class fighters. It ties into politics. It ties into social. It ties into so many things.
Absolutely. Now I got to ask, because, the entire country of Brazil is going to be watching this card now, because you got two of the biggest stars in the history of Brazilian combat sports on the same card, Vitor and Anderson. Of course, they have fought each other in mixed martial arts. Is there any chance, like, if they both win, could we see a boxing match between those two? Is that something you'd be willing to promote?
Anything is possible. And I don't think that's not a bad matchup. I think we'd have to see how that comes out. It's one of the things that I find very surprising is, and I guess not surprising, but it was reassuring, I'll say, to see that the Oscar Vitor odds are basically equal. And that, when I talk to anybody from either side of the fence, UFC side, MMA side, or boxing, they're like, I don't know who's going to win. They're like, it's a really, really interesting fight. And that the more I hear that, the more I'm like, wow, that means we have a good fight on our hands.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let me ask you, Ryan. One other thing you've done, since you've kind of come into space and been a bit of a disruption, and I mean that as a compliment to the combat sports spaces, you have been very vocal talking about fighter pay, and obviously one thing that has come up with the Dana White situation is that obviously you guys went out of your way and did that donation to the fighter who had started the GoFundMe. Now, I'm not going to lie and say it's not great PR. It is great PR. Obviously, you get a chance to, kind of needle him a little bit with that. I get it. But you also helped out a fighter who was obviously desperately in need. They're starting a GoFundMe to be able to afford a training camp. And obviously, we know the boxing model versus MMA. Boxers typically make a much bigger lion's share of the profit than what we do in MMA. But that is something you have spoken about. I know you were trying to get George St-Pierre, a guy who, I'm sure you heard recently, George, you made comments like he's still interested in doing something, maybe work with you guys down the road. But do you feel like that's something that you've been very passionate about in terms of addressing that? Because that's a subject that's almost taboo in the world of MMA, especially when it comes to Dana.
It is, and I think it's really sad because obviously not coming from this sport, but being entrenched in it now, these are people who work harder and put their brains and their bodies through more than any field I've ever seen, than any profession I've ever seen. I mean, they literally just they push themselves to the brink of death, literally, and they put their brains through the most intense, excruciating torture. And they've also got a limited fighting life. It's not like a doctor or a lawyer, or where, you can, if you want to work, you work till you're 80 or 90, or, till the day you die. Like in this world, because of the toll it takes on your body, there's the timing in that. And the fact that, the UFC model exploits the fighters and, lines their own pockets, which is fine. Like, we're all into commerce, like, go make a lot of money, but pay your fighters. Like, they're the ones that you're building the business on. Like, and it's just, I mean, to me, I find it, I'll say almost disgusting that, you can go build a $5 billion brand, but that you can't pay your fighter enough to be in camp, and you're paying her less than you pay your ring girls. It's nonsensical for what you're asking them to do. And so a lot of people accuse us of overpaying and say, oh, you overpay your fighters, and the way I look at it is, if we're making money and they're making money, then we're not overpaying them. And it's that simple. Like, if we can make a profit enough to make the business make sense and grow, and yet pay them and make it fair for them, that's the way business should be run. And, it bites you in the ass otherwise. I mean, I'm surprised that the UFC hasn't had more of an issue to date, that they haven't had, I know they've talked about attempts at unionization, but beyond that, where they haven't actually had challenges to their contracts of being unconstitutional. Indentured servitude is not allowed in the United States. And yet, George St-Pierre, who is officially retired from the UFC and has made it very clear he will never fight in MMA again, isn't allowed to get in a boxing ring and make probably in the highest paydays of what he would get to fight someone who he considers to be, on his bucket list, because Dana White says he can't. I mean, that's just wrong.
Yeah, I'm curious in that regard. If, again, I know this is a difficult question to answer, but would you still want to work with George? I mean, he's still expressed interest in it. Obviously, it's going to come down to the Dana White thing, but it sounds like you'd still like to work with him.
I have so much respect for George, both as a fighter and a person. I think he's a great fighter. I think as a person, he's just humble, and from what I know, gotten to know of him, really easy to work with. And frankly, if he wanted to, he could challenge his contract, and I'm fairly certain he could win. But it's not my decision to make. But I believe if he wanted to fight with us and he was willing to, take on the UFC, and let them know that he was going to attempt to have his contract deemed, non-constitutional, which I believe it would be. But until then, there's nothing we can do because, we get legal letters from Dana saying we're interfering in his contracts whenever when I tweeted that when John Bones was having his little disputes that he wanted out of the UFC, I tweeted out and just said, at Bones, maybe you can do something with Fight Club and we can work something out with the UFC. I didn't say like around them. I just said, we'll work something out with them. Maybe it's good for all of us. I got a legal letter that we were interfering with their fighters. So, until and unless someone makes that decision, there's not much we can do because we're not them, right? But we would love to do something with George and love to do something long-term with him.
Yeah. I would imagine you saw when Ben Askren had his fight, obviously with Jake, you saw the stories. He said very openly it was the biggest payday he ever made of his entire career. And this is a guy who was a champion, in multiple organizations. And I'm not trying to take digs at the industry I cover, but that says a lot. And you've seen it recently. I mean, obviously it's not your promotion, but Tyron Woodley's talking about he's making more money to box Jake Paul than he's ever made in his career. And I'm like, that's kind of a bad sign when a guy's a 4-time defending champion and his first boxing match, he's making more money. But that being said, obviously you have married these combat sports so well together and you're having so much fun doing the entertainment thing. Can I imagine if there are other fighters available, and again, out of contract, let's say that clearly, down the road, they have name value. Like, can I imagine you will work with more, ex-UFC fighters, mixed martial artists who want to come in, just like you're doing with Anderson, just like you did with Ben, all those kind of things?
100%. So we are, very interested in working with any MMA fighter who, especially legends who still want to fight, but perhaps aren't fighting, under contract or, are ready for a second win, so to speak. We find a lot of times in fighters, whether it's boxers or MMA, that, they burn out a bit and they think they're done. And then they get a second win. Look at Oscar. He's the perfect example. He is getting back to the ring for the first time in over 10 years. And I'll tell you, like, I talk to him daily. He'll tell you he's in better shape now than he ever was in his whole life, and that he feels better now than he ever has in his whole life. And I think there's a lot of guys like that. I mean, even Tyson, look how good he looked. Like, it was, I get it was fun and it was this, it was that, but he looked great. He was in shape. His punches looked strong. His moves looked strong. I mean, he looked very good. And I think when it comes to MMA, it's exactly the same. We have a plan to launch our own, call it MMA spinoff, if you will, that will combine boxing and MMA on our cards and take some elements of both. And so part of doing this and marrying them is to create a hybrid, I'll call it, that marries the two a little bit.
Boy, you are seriously reading my mind, because I was curious, like, what would be the possibility of Triller getting involved in more mixed martial arts? Because obviously you've seen the interest. And, listen, again, I work for a mixed martial arts website. We cover boxing. We cover the big boxing events. Well, we've covered every Triller event. That should tell you, we've covered every Triller event, and we're going to be at Triller. We're going to be at, Oscar De La Hoya and Vitor Belfort. So it tells you the magnitude of these events. So it sounds like you do want to get involved in some sort of the MMA space a little bit.
Yeah, so we are we're actually being wooed, I'll call it, by various states and commissions to create so we have a concept of call it a hybrid ring that's kind of a ring meets a little bit of a cage that has mostly boxing, but with a few MMA twists in there. And we're going to be picking a state soon. As we're kind of getting, various states are chasing us for it. So I can share with you that the ring will be a triangle.
Interesting. I like it. And again, originality, right? Original, something we haven't seen before, somebody's willing to actually take a chance to do something different.
Well, if you think about it, because the triangle has effectively 3 actual corners, it makes it very, very interesting.
Yeah. Absolutely. Before I get you out of here, Ryan, I got to ask you, you guys did so much of this, kind of creating Triller Fight Club during the pandemic, which is crazy to think about, because this last year has been insane. We haven't had crowds. We were all kind of stuck inside. We haven't been able to be around people. How excited are you to start doing these cards with bigger audiences? I mean, obviously, I know tickets go on sale this week for De La Hoya and Belfort. I'm sure you're expecting a massive crowd at Staples Center for Oscar's return. Obviously, Vitor, and of course now with Anderson and Tito as well. But how excited are you to see what you've been doing on the entertainment side, the filming, the you talk about the camera work, the lighting, everything for the show, but to have a live audience there as well, a big live audience.
It's really exciting. And, we did our first real one on last 2 Tuesdays ago at Madison Square Garden for the Trillerverse. And we had the most people in that room that they've ever had at Madison Square. And we had thousands of people storming the gates to get in. It was the most packed. You couldn't move. And I think, we're really hoping that we got lucky, because the fact that we were doing this where we didn't have an audience allowed us to perfect it for the screen, and then gave us the time to turn around and say, okay, now how do we add in the live audience element around it? Which I think, allowed us to reconfigure and rebuild how boxing is looked at. Let's look at it first from the perspective of the screen and then add in the live audience. And so, I know that we crashed the ticketing site even before we went on sale. Just the announcement of, Vitor, of Anderson and people trying to go check and see if it was on sale. We crashed the ticketing site. But we have some pretty big expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the Trillerverse. Let me go ahead and compliment you on that as well. Once again, talking about getting outside just the regular combat sports space, like you saw the buzz for that. The buzz for that event was massive. It was huge. Everyone was buzzing about that event, the showdown in that event. It was so cool. And it was just so different. Again, taking chances and doing things that are not being done. And it's all getting attention, right? It's all getting buzz. It's all getting people chatting online, and it's working. I imagine Triller is working.
Well, that event, the stat that I was blown away by is that we had in concurrent viewers, meaning real-time number of viewers, more than any show or network show this entire year. So we're the number one most watched show. And I'm not saying like rerun and like people who went back and watched streaming or web views. No, like people watching at the actual time. It was the number one show of anything. It'd be The Bachelor, it'd be baseball, it'd be football. And then it was the number 3 most watched for the last 12 months, only second to, I think it was Monday Night Football and one other.
Crazy. Well, I'm sure you're expecting a massive event on September 11th. This is going to be a really fun fight card. I actually had plans that weekend. I didn't mean to do it. I had plans that weekend. I've now canceled my plans so I can make sure I'm going to be around to cover the Triller Fighters. I was like, I can't miss this. I can't miss this card. I can't. I'm sorry. My plans were going to have to wait another weekend. I can't miss this card. It's going to be an incredible event. You guys have done a great job with the show. I look forward to it. Ryan, thank you so much for taking the time. On a totally personal level, let me tell you have produced some of my favorite movies of all time as well. So I'm a bit of a fanboy in that regard. So thank you for all. I'm a bit of a cinephile myself, so I love movies. So thank you for that, and keep up the good work, man. I cannot wait to see what it looks like on September 11th, and looking forward to see what Triller does for the rest of the year.
Can't wait to see you, and we'll see you at the event, if not before.